We heard him talk about a national emergency on the southern border. He's going to declare that here on day one. I want to go to Maria Villarreal. She's in Texas. She covers, obviously, the issue of immigration and the southern border for us. And Maria, they were expecting this, authorities in the border states, that Donald Trump would act and act quickly. And they've now heard it in the inaugural address. They now await the signing with the pen a little later this afternoon to put some of these words into action. Exactly what that action looks like remains to be seen. And as John Carl just pointed out, whether or not we'll see any sort of beginning to mass deportations still remains up in the air, though he's given every indication, President Trump, that he intends to act and quickly here.
You know, David, I think Mary Bruce probably put it best a little earlier, right? She said we heard the inaugural address and then we heard a second address. And I think that's when we really got a good sense of what Trump is really focused on, what's important to him, where he feels most comfortable. We've been talking about this all throughout the election, right? For me, though, this gave us a lot more perspective on what we can expect at the border. And I think that's what a lot of people, a lot of contacts and sources down here have been waiting for. There have been a lot of rumblings for weeks about what could potentially happen. I mean, obviously, he talked today about bringing back Remain in Mexico. We've also heard a lot of conversations around Title 42. And when you talk about those two policies coming back, David, I think it's a real concern, not just for the people that are going to have to respond to the issues that are going to happen along the border, but really what is going to be happening in Mexico. There are shelters right now that don't have a lot of migrants, don't have a lot of families, but their bigger concern is, like, if you implement a Remain in Mexico, I mean, basically that in Title 42 allows people to just allows our federal government to push migrants back into Mexico to wait for their asylum cases to be heard. That will instantly create issues in these shelters. And then that's when we will also see the potential for a lot of those camps where, you know, people are waiting along the border in awful conditions to try and get heard. I mean, this caused some major issues and major tension between the U.S. and Mexico when these two policies were both in place during the first Trump administration and then, you know, sweeping into the Biden administration as well.
Any indication from authorities there on the ground as to how far they think the Trump administration will go in these early days? You talk about Title 42, of course, was used during COVID. It was actually used in the early days of the Biden administration until the courts caught up with them. But there's been a lot of talk about whether or not that can be brought back in light of other concerns that are now on the radar.
You know, and I think that is why it's so important for us to pay attention to the verbiage, the wording of how these executive orders will come out. Obviously, this is a very smart Trump administration that has been planning, you know, what they're going to do along the border for not just a few months, but really the last year or so. How can they get around the court systems that have already said Remain in Mexico cannot be used any longer by the Biden administration? So in order to bring it back, they've got to write that policy a little bit differently. So we got to pay attention to that. Also, Title 42. You know, the reason why we heard the president come in and say, listen, this is a national emergency along our southern border, is that gives him a lot of freedom to then use things like our military, you know, the Department of Defense, bringing troops down here, not just the National Guard anymore. So I think we're going to see him use those avenues, and then also the help of Title 42. Again, we've heard a lot of rumblings along the border, a lot of sources and contacts saying we do believe Title 42 is going to come back. This is something that local law enforcement, but more specifically Customs and Border Patrol, these agents can use instantly. It is plug and play for them, David, because they've already had Title 42 in place. They had 4 to 5 years of being able to use that particular policy. So for them, they're ready to go. It's just a matter of what comes out in those executive orders as to exactly, you know, what situations will call for those policies.
Have any of the authorities who've witnessed sort of the change in just the last 6 months there, given the very late stage action taken by outgoing President Joe Biden, and has anyone asked the question down there, why not simply have acted much sooner for the Democrats, obviously given the swift reduction in just the issue at the border in the last 6 months?
You know, we're actually standing in El Paso, right? This is a very blue area in a very red state. We've talked a lot to local community leaders here who have asked that exact question. You know, their hope was that during this last administration, the Biden administration, they would see, more of a concerted effort to tackle the immigration issue as a whole and to get everybody on board, right? That we would see this kind of bipartisan coming, to the middle of the aisle and really trying to figure out not just what the root causes were, but really what are the policies that we can put into place that will long-term fix this particular issue. Unfortunately, we saw that, border security bill that would have tried to fix some of the issues. Obviously, that was that didn't go through last December. And so then President Biden had to step in and issue his own executive order to tighten up what was happening along the border. David, as of right now, listen, it's a considerable difference where I'm standing right now, December 2023, when we saw apprehensions at an all-time high. Now, December of 2024, there was an 80% decrease in apprehensions. And it has a lot to do, right, with the tighter restrictions that we saw the Biden administration put into place. But also they created more pathways for people to seek asylum in a legal way. The biggest concern right now is that if we start to strip away at what's already been put in place, that there will be chaos created along the border when it's quiet right now. One thing we can already point to, the CBP One app. This was an app that was put in place in order to try and streamline the number of people that were coming through. We talked to a lot of people that work not just here along the border in Texas, but also in Mexico. They talked about this app really helping them and also migrants when it came to the dangerousness of crossing the border illegally and the involvement of cartels. Basically, people were saying, listen, I'm going to go about it the right way. I'm going to use the CBP One app and I'm going to wait for my turn. With that app now gone, there is a real big concern that the chaos will re-ensue.
Maria Villarreal on the border for us. Maria, thank you.